We'll be referring to those documents today. Let me start by welcoming everybody, welcoming the task force, our intrepid select board representative Terry Ackerman, deputy town manager Megan Samuto, Chris Carmody, risk manager Karen Nirenberg from EPA, Matt Robbie from SKIO, and others from SKIO, Sophie as well. So everybody, good morning. Let's call the roll. I'll start by just around the Zoom board here. Rich Feely.
Here.
Court Booth.
Present.
Carrie Flood.
Here.
Kurt Herman.
Here.
Pam Hill. You're on mute, Pam, and Carl Seidman is just coming on. There he is. Hi, Carl. Are you present? Yes, you are. Hi, and I'm Paul Bone. So we have a quorum. I think David Rope will not be joining us. David has been ill and has been communicating with us, and we'll miss him today. Gary Kleiman has a conflict this morning, but we have a quorum, and I think we can accomplish our agenda. So let's talk about the agenda for the moment. I'm going to share my screen here, which I've learned to do. There we go. It's a pretty simple agenda, but I think we're going to have some pretty interesting discussions. I think all the meetings from this point forward will kind of start out by sort of a breezy update by the work stream teams. And that could range from nothing new to report to something substantive. I do know specifically that the reuse work stream, Rich and Gary have documents in the work package, and they're going to want to discuss those. But we'll end with that team. We'll start with the others. The main topics refer in general to a follow-up on our last call, which was we talked about the EPA meeting coming up, and we talked about when we should start our public meetings and what those should be about. And I do have a little concept to discuss with that. I also want to, related to that, I want to talk about, I call it media, but it's more of a communications plan going forward, more with the town than the media. And to that end, thank you, Carl, for circulating the Envision Concord's communication plan. I think that's a useful, comprehensive template. We may not want to take all those pieces, but there's some good material there. Either in the context of number 2 or 3C here, I want to talk about how we're doing in coordinating with our support resources, SKIO, RU, Town Council, and then I want to chat about the next meeting. So I'll take it off the screen share for the moment. I'll go back there in a minute. So let's go around the horn here, and with any updates. So Carrie and Carl, you want to start with I'll call it the post-acquisition economics management pieces. Anything to report?
Well, we had a meeting last week just to kind of discuss how to dig into our work stream. Pam Rockwell is kind of taking the lead and looking into institutional controls. And Carrie's kind of taking the lead in terms of looking at some other Superfund sites, learning from them. We've also, I've decided I'm going to kind of dig a little deeper, come up with a more comprehensive understanding, or at least first cut of our understanding of the actual services and investments that are going to be needed from the site, and what town department would potentially be responsible for that. And we hope that, finalize that with the committee, and that will kind of guide us in what type of questions and information we want to, collect from other from town departments. I don't know, Carrie, anything else? Does that cover it?
No, I will just say that in talking with other towns, my primary or my initial interest is what kind of process did they go through in deciding whether or not to acquire the site? What issues were they talking about? What risks did they feel were there? Haven't gotten very far vacation season, I guess, and getting in touch with people in those towns, but I've reached out to a couple. And will report back as I hear things.
Yeah, one thing I did, there are of course overlaps between these work streams. I think you'll see when Rich talks about the reuse work, I think they with help with SKIO are starting to talk to potential third parties and their interests in the site. And that's both a reuse and it's also part of a kind of a future the future economics of the site. So I think you guys should keep an eye on that, vice versa.
Right.
One addition I forgot to mention, we've reached out to SKIO to see if we can just talk with them to see what research or other support they could provide to our kind of work stream. So we're trying to schedule that for our next meeting, work stream meeting later this month.
Pam.
Yeah, I just, I don't know where this fits in, but I've been thinking, especially when I read the 2021 report, there is discussion of towns that did what we are considering doing, acquiring a Superfund site. Are there lists of towns that have declined that are similarly situated that we should be researching a little bit? I don't know if they exist. I bet they do, but it'd be interesting to see if there are other towns out there who had a similar situation and for various reasons decided not to go forward with an acquisition. Not that I think that's where we should go, but I just think it'd be good data.
Good question.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I'm not sure if who keeps data on that, but perhaps EPA has some information to that end. We'll,
I think it'd be good to just at least find out if there is such are identified towns that are, as I said, I think it'd be good to look into that.
okay. Matt, you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond because I think Pam Rockwell had reached out to Tara and SKIO early on, asking for examples of towns that had acquired Superfund sites and to learn about the process they went through. And Carrie, when you were talking about what you were doing, I was wondering if you were using any of the contacts that Kat might have passed along.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Yep.
I think similarly, there are certainly situations that we have encountered where towns have or are in the process, in a longer term process of evaluating whether or not to take on a Superfund site. And so I think we probably could find some examples of towns where they have not yet decided to do it, or they don't have the resources to do it, or they, for a variety of reasons, they're just choosing not to. We probably could have examples of that as well.
That'd be great. I think it'd be useful.
Yeah, I do too. Carl and Carrie, a question on sort of the economics. I know you're early in your work, but one of the pieces that's going to be interesting to the select board is sort of the financial part. What does it cost to manage and operate a Superfund site? And I think that starts from the infrastructure and goes to the kind of operation and management of institutional controls and everything in between. How are you getting that information? Is that and who you tapping into for that?
Well, I think on the institutional control one, I think we're trying to look at other community. I think a combination of things. One, look at other communities and what's been required to deal with the institutional controls, and also look at some of the contaminated sites that the town is already involved in, and what's involved there. Pam raised an interesting question of, is it going to cost the town more if we own it or we don't own it? Where there's still going to be these institutional controls, failure to maintain them, which mostly relate to not doing things. The town might want to have a similar response or oversight role, even if we don't own the site. I mean, that's a question, we're kind of exploring. On the other costs, I think we're gonna start by trying to see what we can learn from town departments. For example, what would it cost CMLP to extend the electric infrastructure throughout the site, at least beginning with the master plan concept that we have now, and assuming that there'll be development, in the 3 zones we've talked about. Similarly, with public works and other departments, police, fire, and get a sense from them of what they think the impact will be, what the infrastructure would be, what the cost would be, what the impact on services would be. I think we're going to start by doing it, on the town, because it's an extension of the town's activity. So, I'm more trusting of town departments being able to estimate that cost than looking to some third party. I mean, some of that might be hard to determine, like the septic system. You have to know where it's going to go. You have to know what capacity it needs and stuff like that. So I'm not sure all the answers will be able to get determined until we know more, and perhaps we'd need some engineering advice on it. But I think that's sort of how we're starting it.
Yeah. I think the other piece, I'll call it the baseline, because there so the Maximus and EPA is part of their work. There are services of various types, water and electric, and I'm not sure what they're doing with stormwater. So that information on, the baseline, what will be left after the cleanup in terms of infrastructure, and whether or not we can influence that. If there's a decision on acquisition, I don't know, next year, and cleanup takes another few years, can we influence any part of that? So I think that baseline information, I'll kind of give that up maybe on Kara's to-do list to work with you guys to just get that information.
Yeah.
What's there, what's planned for infrastructure.
Yeah, I noticed when we did do a tour of the site, there was some mention that there is water, there's water pipes already on the site. So, I mean, hopefully the town has maps of that. And that the power plant put in some conduits. So, we have to find out what infrastructure is there, as baseline, and how it has to be extended or upgraded. Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments or questions for Carl and Karen?
I guess the only thing we probably need to talk, because as you'll see when you get to our stuff, we have a list of town departments to talk to about their specific interest in an activity at the site as opposed to extending town infrastructure. And there's probably a little overlap there. I think we can, certainly don't want to take more time from town departments than we have to, but we feel we need to talk to them to, go back to how much demand or lack of demand there is for using the site for their activities as opposed to infrastructure.
Yeah, we should try and coordinate that. I'm hoping by the end of the month or so, we'll be able to put together a set of questions.
Okay, let's move on, Kurt, to kind of risk and risk communication. And I know that there's sort of 2 parts to that. David presented at last meeting on the communication part, so it's kind of still, I guess, to be determined, and maybe we'll talk about that more in terms of our meetings. But can you give us an update on what you're thinking, especially on we haven't talked much on the risk part, and so RU, of course, is for the town is looking at the site and doing, I'll call it the reuse specific risk. Is that a coordination part, Kurt? Are you looking at that independently, or tell us more about that?
Yeah, that's an open question I had for you and the team, Paul. I'd like to propose that I reach out and coordinate with RU to help guide their efforts, but I wanted to let them kind of let the dust settle from their site visit, get their hands on the data, and start laying out some conceptual scenarios for the risk assessment. But I think it's probably about time, as long as that's okay within the protocols of the task force. To
Well,
record.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's necessary, and I defer a bit to Chris Carmody. Of course, he's managing that effort, but
Right.
to the extent that we're going to rely partly or completely on their work, we have to have our hands on at least a part on the steering wheel or on the stick shift or whatever it is. Alternatively, you could take your own independent look at that. Maybe not as deep a dive as they're doing, because I know right now Rue is with Chris's help and Kara's help is trying to get a hold of all the data. I mean, there's a ton of data.
Right.
But so they're doing a very detailed dive. So I don't know. You need to think about whether the coordination part satisfies our needs or there's something we need to do independently.
Yeah, maybe I'll look at it from a data gap analysis, or just, are there conceptual scenarios that weren't considered in baseline human health risk assessment that might be on the table for post remediation redevelopment, and just see if, what Rue's doing independently, if there's something that we should be considering that they're not.
Yeah, so Kurt, I'd be happy to meet with you this week, if you've got time, or next week, whenever it's good for you. And we can talk about, that scope of work with Rue.
That sounds great. I'll follow up with you with some availability for later this week or early next.
That sounds great.
Yeah, and Chris, I know you've been looking to me to be a point on the coordination with Rue, and especially with upcoming discussions. I think Kurt should be involved in those to the extent that he has time as well. He should probably be the point person on coordination with Rue. I'd like to know what's going on, but I think I would defer to Kurt, because I think that's right in his wheelhouse.
Yeah, happy to do that, Paul.
Okay.
Chris.
Okay.
We'll get back a little bit on the risk communication part in the context of a discussion of public meetings, but let's defer that a little later. Pam, you got a question? Hi.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Kara, the 95% soils draft that is out right now, has Rue got that information?
Yes, I believe that was sent to them. And my last plug is that, so I'm sending comments to Maximus on Friday. So any comments?
Right, and the 2229 committee is sending comments, I think, later today to you.
Great.
So, and that there's going to be a holding basin 1, 2 that comes out shortly. Is that also going to be a 95%?
No, there's some time for that still. We're not there yet.
Okay, but everything that's come to everyone else has also made its way to Rue already, right?
I believe so. And if they don't, they can reach out. We'll give it to them.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Okay. Third in line here, the legal team, Pam and Court. I have not heard back from Carrie on the letter we sent, because, and I'm not sure what that means, if anything, and I'm not sure what the discussion is on the budget, but short of that, I have nothing to add on that, although I did ask Cat West to reach out to you guys. So tell us what's happening.
Well, I'll just start, but I want to pass it over to Court. We had a very good conversation with Kat several days ago. Thanks for enabling that, Paul. And I think one of the big procedural questions for us is our interactions with town council. I'll let Court speak to that, and then maybe I'll come back later.
Yeah, I would echo that. Very productive meeting with Kat. In fact, we're starting to acquire documents, some of which are recent, some of which I think have some history to them that Skio's sharing with us. So Pam and I've got a good bit of homework coming in to our inbox on this that we can't report on yet, because Kat is at a conference this week and she's simply starting to populate a site where she's got some information for us. My take on it, and I haven't said this to you explicitly, perhaps Pam, my take is given what SKIO's doing, given what we expect town council will be doing, information that's come in already and is going to be generated, some of our role is going to be that of coordination so that the various experts in the mix don't stumble on each other. Maybe that's a service we can offer. We are ready, Paul, when you are ready to have our initial conversation with town council to tackle this first issue of how do we keep a town council front and center on this, because ultimately the accountability lies there for legal advice. But at the same time, take advantage of the other sources, the other work that's coming in. So I think by the time you're ready to permit that initial meeting, we'll be ready with whatever homework has come in on this.
One of the, just if I may add here, but Paul, we need your guidance on this, I gather. The key, that we had a very productive discussion as we just reported. The key relationship is going to ultimately be the town council, because as you know, the town council is the one who represents us. And in that capacity, the town council enjoys all the privileges that are legally available under the canons of ethics and other legal things. So, and that is the person whose sole interest is our interest, which is not exactly the same, of course, as other entities. Having said that, we need to really work on figuring out how we actually, make sure that happens and work with town council to get the most clear advice we can get from him, and also get a good record established. What do we need to have in writing? What do we need to have in the record from our lawyers? And that's a piece of work we've got to do. And I think that the question of how much it's all going to cost is going to be interesting, because I think that the using the services of the town council is going to be an important piece. And I don't know that we've enumerated all the elements of that work, but for now, the main thing is as Court said, we need to figure out how we can speak with town council and when. And in the conversation with SKIO, it was clear that it would, in SKIO's mind, and I think Court and I initially agree, it would probably be useful to have SKIO at the table with us. That is Kat, unless there's a reason not to do that. But bottom line is, we're waiting on you, Paul, to see if we can when we can get together. Mina.
I'm going to defer in a minute to Megan, but let me give you an opinion. The different levels of activity here. I think one is for you guys to become very knowledgeable of the various options. When we did the reuse report, I did my own research. I spoke with people, and we had that section in there, so we became a little bit more conversant. So when we did talk with Mina, we understood what he was talking about, and actually could suggest various things to him. So I think the conversations you're having with Kat are not privileged, they're advisory, and just to get you more familiar with the various options. And she may actually suggest various pathways. The actual determination of which way we go has to be approved and or originated by town council. And to what extent those discussions with him, with or without SKIO, are privileged, I'm going to defer to Megan for a moment, because this group can have executive sessions to discuss those matters, or you could have separate discussions which are privileged. We have to be very careful about that, because, as I mentioned before, while our interest in having the site a productive future are aligned with EPA, SKIO is EPA's contractor, so I think we have to use all the resources appropriately without stepping on our toes here. Megan, help out here.
Paul, is your question about speaking with council and SKIO at the same time, or is it about the budget for council?
It's more when are we having privileged discussions which either have to be just with us and or executive sessions with Mina. You know, we can have discussions with Mina on general, I mean, without informing opinions, which aren't privileged, but at some point they become privileged.
Yeah, I think it's a little hard for me to answer at this point. I think if you have this is what we want to talk to council about in a group, then I can answer, should it be executive session or not? But it's a little bit challenging for me to think about situations that I don't have in front of me yet.
Well, can I just jump in here? I obviously, you know, this is a complicated situation with respect to privilege. Maybe the most pointed question, and perhaps the simplest one or not, because all of this is, volumes are written on this stuff, is when can Court and I, let's put Skio aside, when can Court and I have a conversation with Mina?
Sure.
And that may be the easiest, and then maybe Court and I can talk to Mina about the utility of conversations that bring in, let's say, simply Skio, or then get into executive session. I think that would be helpful to me, and I think to Court. Can we talk to Mina? And I hope the answer is yes, and then we can, with Mina, discover what the parameters of our discussions are and what is privileged and what isn't. So the bottom line is, can Court and I talk to Mina? That's the question.
Understood. Thank you. So, you know, the task force put together a letter requesting for a legal budget. And that, as you mentioned, has been sent to Carrie. And my understanding is that she's planning on discussing this with the select board on August 28th. And if a conversation with Mina can happen beforehand, I'll follow up with you all about that. But my understanding is that, you know, there's a request for a budget, for a legal budget. It was not part of this year's budget. So, you know, there are funds set aside for legal work. But there is a lot of legal work in this town. And so, you know, thinking about where the funds could come from, Carrie has decided this should be discussed with the select board. So that, I believe that conversation will happen at the end of the month. But if a conversation could happen ahead of time, I'll find out for you about that.
That's great. That's really great. And thank you very much for that. I mean, I think, first of all, Court, tell me if you disagree, but I don't think that there is terrible urgency on this. We have to digest material. You know, August is tough. I mean, I could see us having this conversation in September. The other thing that I think is becoming clearer to me, having had the conversation with Skio, is that our learning process on this, especially with respect to the legal stuff, and actually the trajectory for us getting to the point where we can say we want to acquire the site, that is that may be more attenuated than we currently think. I think and one of the things that Skio and Court and I talked about, and Court, please jump in because I can mess things up, you know, is what is the real trajectory here? What has to happen before we can say, even if we want to do it quickly, you know, that we are in a position to acquire the site? And I think there's a bit of a mystery in that. I don't know that we know the answer to that question. When is it that we can actually have accumulated enough information to, with the lawyer and other sources, make a real recommendation? But anyway, having said that, Megan, thanks a lot. I think this is what Court and I need, right, Court?
Yeah, and I think what we're doing, Pam, is we're looking toward refining big milestones in the path you just suggested, because it's not going to be a single sequence with everything of equal import. There's going to be some milestones, and we want to agree on what they are.
Exactly.
So I think once Mina has a budget, you guys should talk with them outside of this group, and there shouldn't be any impediments to that. If there's a larger discussion, we may have to do executive session. But I think one thing in thinking about how do we make the decision, maybe you ought to think about criteria. If we can acquire the site with X, Y, Z criteria, then we as a task force are comfortable recommending to the select board. And I'm thinking of, on the liability side, I'm thinking of the covenants not to sue. I'm thinking of things that are protective to the town. What would make the town most comfortable on the legal side, the criteria? And you can probably get that from just reading of the information. Now, executing that is something Mina has to negotiate. Or forgiveness of all the liens, the ideal criteria. that
No, I
so-
think frankly, that's not that hard. I think what's hard is getting to the point where we hear from town council that we know how to resolve those liens, that we know how long it's going to take to get a prospective purchaser agreement with
Yeah,
through EPA and through the Justice Department, because I think maybe we have to go through DOJ. That's the kind of stuff I think that becomes sort of threshold and can be done in tandem, certainly, can be understood in tandem with what you're talking about. But I actually think that what you're talking about is less of a threshold question than the ones that have to be really taken apart with town council, I think.
okay, but I don't disagree with that, but I'm just thinking, from the town's perspective, what would make the select board most comfortable with, in layman's terms? The legal side of that has to be resolved in layman's, and I just articulate a few of them. And I'm saying that because then you can have productive conversations with Mina on those topics. How do we do this? What's the pathway of doing that? How do we do that? What's your progress in doing that? And I mention this because I've been around the block on, for over a few years, Gary Clayman and I, and this is no knock on Mina, but he's been in an advisory mode as opposed to a decision mode. Here are the various options, but now we want to come to closure. So I think your conversations with them would be I think would be more helpful if you could direct him on what we want to know.
Yeah, but we shouldn't belabor it. But the bottom line, I think that, and I'm a lawyer, and I keep saying this when you're a hammer, everything's a nail, but I do think that the legal determinations here on some of this stuff are going to be the things that will make the select board comfortable or not. I really do. And I think those have to be, explicated by Mina at some point as our town council. And
We're in total agreement.
great, good.
But I think you could lay out the terms of acquisition right now, which would have no legal force. But then you have to say, well, how do we implement these meetings? So I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah, I do too. I would add, I'm comfortable, Pam, waiting until September, because as I said earlier to the group, we've got information still coming in our way. And we don't want to pay somebody to plow new ground for us. My question, Paul, maybe this goes to Megan. When Pam and I do sit down with council, do we want somebody in the room with us? Does Chris want to be there? How does that work?
Well,
We'll probably, we'll probably sit
It
in.
doesn't fly on the wall, but I think somebody from the town official.
Yeah.
Megan,
Yeah, I think either Chris and I will join in. I think that's probably what we'll do.
Good, okay.
I think it's a great idea that you are his client.
So we'll coordinate all of that when the time comes, and that'll be post August 28th.
Yeah, that's
Definitely.
that's the plan. I think that
Got
the budget discussion has to happen on the 28th, I believe. So if anything changes there, I'll let you know.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Good. Thanks, Paul.
okay, good progress. A lot of these issues we have to kind of resolve. How do we do our work? And I think we're coming to closure on a lot of those. Which includes a lot of coordination with the outside resources, obviously. Okay, Rich, do you want to take it over? Rich?
Yeah.
Do you want me to share?
Okay, go ahead.
Do you want me to share the documents?
Yeah, I think the spreadsheet is probably a bit much. Why, give me a minute to sort of introduce the package and then
Okay,
we certainly don't want to walk through the spreadsheet column by column, but I'll talk about what we intend to do with that and get some feedback, and then I can talk about the town letters as well. Our general approach, is we've got to find out what the market is, and market broadly defined includes town uses for this site. And what we decided with SKIO is that we would use the map that goes back to the previous study that shows what I would call four developable areas, areas that are not off limits, either like the bog for environmental reasons or for, safety and control reasons related to the stormwater drainage and all that sort of thing. And to do that, we've asked SKIO to get general data on some of the, purposes or relevant information. One is obviously the rental market and the housing market. I think we know what the housing market is. I don't know how much demand there is for rental space there, but we've asked them to get that. We've asked them to get what traffic data they can get. And then the reason for the large spreadsheet was to try and have some method of thinking analytically about the 4 sites or the 4 subsites. The idea being starting off with things that are simply not, and the list down the left is essentially the various uses used in the town zoning code. And the idea was, well, first, let's see what's essentially precluded by the zoning code. Then when we have material from RU, let's see what uses in each of those sub areas are precluded by risk criteria. Maybe we don't want housing, or maybe we don't want housing on the, footprint of the old plant. And to then look at the market, is there a private market for what can be built here? Or is there a town demand for what can be put here? And then, having looked at those things to come to what things might happen, a short list, if you will, for each subsite, and then ultimately to a recommendation to how to use it. I mean, how we're proceeding at the moment is while SKIO is looking for data, we have identified at least 3 developers with local ties. And we want to have talks with them. We say, we know, how to develop housing and mixed use, but what's your perception of the demand on a site like this? And to get, something that's better than just the percentage of retail space that's vacant or something like that. And we planning to talk to them after the 1st of September. We've made initial contacts, and those 3 have said they would talk to us. We certainly would welcome others. And then the idea is, if we get approval for the letter, which is in the packet, and at some point we probably want to put that up, Paul, then with the proper protocol, presumably through Carrie, we would ask to have those individual letters sent to the town departments, and then have a meeting with them. I can see from our discussions here that there's obviously some overlap with what the sort of continuing use subcommittee will have to look at in terms of town costs. But we'd like to get started, and there's no point, if there's no market for something, if nobody wants it, then that shouldn't take up time in looking at what the town's cost would be to do something. And then finally, the prototype letter, which was in the packet, is simply a common first paragraph and a common last paragraph about who we are and why we're asking and all that sort of thing. And then based on the previous report, there's substance for each of the town agencies about the questions we'd like to ask. So that's the approach, particularly with Gary not here. I'm not sure we want to get into any detail about the spreadsheet, but people have comments about using that as a way to structure our research. I certainly would welcome
Let me, Carl, I see your hand is raised. Let me ask you a question first. I want to put up the spreadsheet just, yeah. So I think I've kind of blown this up a little bit. And I don't want to discuss in detail, but so I understand what your rows are based on quote unquote zoning code. But it seemed to me looking at those, and maybe it's intentional, the input from the town, the municipal uses, the potential actual uses are largely missing. There's a bit of recreational use here. So how do you factor in? So we'll talk about the letters, but where are the municipal uses here?
Well,
were they spread out throughout here? Because there's a lot
Yep.
here that, I mean, it's based on the coast, cemetery, et cetera, but where are the real potential uses that we know about?
well, some of them are not a zoning category, which is why they're there. Utilities, obviously, and the question of does a light plant want batteries or solar panels or something there? I mean, would they be interested? I think that fits under the utility category. Council on Aging, which I know was discussed, is, comes under municipal services. I forget exactly what the line is there. Transportation uses. I think there's a line there for that. But anyhow, it might be that we need to add some sublines. God knows I don't want to make it more complex for individual municipal uses under one of the zoning categories. Again, things like town offices, if that's an office that happens to be for the town, it's an office use, I would think, but very specific to the town, and we need to ask specific questions about that.
Well, just a suggestion, and I'll pass on to other questioners. I think it strikes me as almost each town department needs its own section here,
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm saying I think we can put, whether we subcategories, that left-hand column is straight out of the zoning code, and we can I think we may be able to collapse some too to keep some.
Yeah, so again, ultimately, I think you have to capture the information that you're going to seek through the letters and have sort of each municipal use as its own category, because I think there are probably multiple use. But I mean, having a matrix like this, which is separated by zones and has different criteria, and of course, one is the risk. I think this is a really good structure. It's just a question of whether these rows are ultimately useful or not. And
Yeah.
With that, Matt, before I get to you, let me Carl had a question. I think Kurt had a question. Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, no, I have a few comments. I mean, I've done a fair amount of market analysis myself, and I think one of the challenges is like the traditional data sources on market use tend to focus on sort of very, what I would call kind of traditional and established markets like office, retail, hotel. There may well be demand that doesn't fall in those categories, that you often have to speak to, users in the marketplace to kind of identify gaps. I'm thinking about Concord, there could be demand for things like artist studio space, small scale, light industrial space. You have an emerging food product. You need kitchen space and potentially expansion space. The market doesn't tend to serve those things. They're not very profitable. They're not large scale, but they may be important to segments of the economy, and kind of, uncovering that type of need. It's almost looking for where are gaps in the market, gaps in segments of the community, segments of the economy that are looking for space, and that sort of the typical private market might not provide. And, some of the local developers might know that, but I think if it's possible to reach out to some, segments of the community that might have demand for space, but won't get really tracked in the secondary data. The other sort of question, in terms of speaking with developers, and I think I've made this comment before, I do think it would be helpful to speak to developers who have experience with brownfield sites, even if they're not local, because they may have a different perception of what's feasible on the site than local developers, if they don't have brownfield experience. So, maybe broadening that net a little bit to tap into that.
We absolutely agree. One of the first three we've identified is actually a Concord resident, but he's in that business and they've done brownfield sites. It's a chap who's actually on the CHDC now. So he's one of the people we definitely want to talk to for just that reason. And if people or SKIO know others who have built on brownfield sites like this, we clearly would want to talk to them. And the other developers, the other two we want to talk to are people who, have done projects in Concord. One of the questions to me is, although there's a generalized desire for housing, and we know we need more housing in Concord, would a developer want to go at risk to build on this site? What do they think the effect of having been an ex-Superfund site would be? And so I agree with you. We need, I would ask if anybody knows any other besides Dan Drazen who have worked with brownfield sites, please let us know. We should talk to them. Maybe Kara can come up with some.
Kurt, you had your hand raised. Is it up or down or?
I withdraw my hand because that was the point I was going to raise. Experience with brownfield sites, I think, is critical just to get past the perceived stigma issue and just really understand what the market is like.
Thank you. I think that's key, and we will, again, Matt, I don't know if you can find some others, but if Pam or anybody else can identify them, we certainly, we'll talk to them.
Yeah, I think we can identify some experts who have experience specifically in the area of kind of larger scale brownfields and Superfund. And I think that is what you need. And I agree with Kurt that you need people that have experience in brownfields who aren't just on principle scared off by the stigma, but you also need people who brownfields relies on a fair amount of incentives that aren't necessarily available at surplus sites because of the way that brownfields funding can't be applied at a Superfund site. And so you also need people who have worked at Superfund sites and know how to make that work. And I think we can provide a couple of examples of folks. We can reach out to some folks and set up those interviews. I think that might be a good way to do it. I do want to make sure that we're doing that in coordination with you all, and that you feel all right about the folks that we want to reach out to. What I wanted to say was, I think, Carl, what really resonated with me about your comment was really, it seems like rather than doing this sort of traditional market research, the goal is really to seek the gaps that might be in municipal or private sector services or uses that the site could fill, right? We want to look for the gaps. And we often do that for uses where there's not a market, where there isn't necessarily a market, sort of like recreational use, where are there gaps in municipal service or uses that this site could fill? Like, do you need more space in your town offices? Probably. Do you need more space for solar? Yes. Those kinds of things. So I thought that was really important. And I thought that kind of helps that might help us sort of rethink what kind of data it is that we're gathering to support that effort. So we can talk
And
more
so,
about that.
so I think, it strikes me as the primary data on uses of the site really should come from the town. And then a meshing of the town uses and developer interests is what ultimately is going to be really make this possible. So this is largely this is a classic brownfields development, and we're asking developers, what do you want to do with the site? This is really starting with the town. What do you want to do with the site? And then bringing in the developers to partner or to figure out how to do it economically, or maybe, for example, recreation has a number of uses. Well, maybe there's a third party that wants to build something to provide those uses. So I think the second part of this discussion, which we haven't gotten to on sort of probing the interest, should almost lead the discussion. And that, I think you'll end up with a different matrix. Lead the discussion in terms of, here are the municipal needs and uses and gaps. And then, how do we factor in the private developer interest into that, as opposed to starting, it's both are important, but it seems like up until this point, the municipal needs, the town needs, are kind of buried in the matrix, and doesn't.
Yeah,
feel
no,
like-
that's a really good point. I think when Gary had come up with this idea, he was thinking, from a kind of town land use perspective, you think about maybe an overlay zoning district. So how might we get to a point where we could say, here would be the uses that are in and out of this overlay zoning district? I think what you're highlighting is that the zoning code itself misses the nuance of like how to capture the municipal uses, which you're suggesting is the first pass at the market research. Yeah.
Well, I think they're both really important, and
Yeah.
I don't want to overwork the matrix here, but just going
No,
forward,
it's fine.
I think I want to get to the second part of the discussion here, but Pam first, then Carl. Pam.
Oh, yeah, this is a very simple point. There is a huge difference between a Superfund site and a brownfield site. Just in terms of perception, risk, and everything. So I don't want us to conflate the two. That's all. I think you need to think about Superfund in a different way. A CERCLA site, an NPL site, is in a whole different category from the much more broadly understood and broadly available brownfields concept.
Yeah.
It's a very good point, and I've always tried to make that distinction when anybody talks about this as a brownfield site. I said it's not. This is a Superfund site that's being cleaned up to residential standards. Most brownfield sites are not cleaned up to residential standards, and that's why they're brown. This is almost a greenfield site. I think we should think.
Also, this is a site that is a this is seriously contaminated, and the stigma and the importance of the designation as a national priorities list site is very important. And I would be very careful about greening it more than acknowledging the deep reality of being a Superfund site.
Yeah, but the deep reality is it's spending $250 million cleaning this thing up.
Right.
And that's the important reality that the citizens need to know. Whatever you call it, greenfield, brownfield, Superfund, it's being cleaned up to residential standards with certain exceptions, which are the institutional control areas. So anyway, but you're right, I agree. It's not a brownfield. We shouldn't talk about this as a brownfield site.
And it's not squeaky clean either, ever.
Well, my backyard is squeaky
Well,
clean.
we've had this conversation. I don't want to.
Yeah. Okay, this is a risk discussion. So, Carl.
Yeah, just one thought. It might be worth reaching out. I don't know if people are familiar with the state agency Mass Development, or it's a quasi-public agency. It works with communities on real estate development issues. It finances development. It has a brownfields fund. It has pre-development assistance funding and stuff like that. It might be useful to get it on their radar screen, make a connection. Like, for example, they may also know of developers who have relevant experience that might be useful. They might also ultimately be a funding source for some research. So I'm just thinking they might be an external resource that might be useful to connect with and help support some of our efforts. So I don't know.
We can certainly add them to the list of people we should talk to. I don't know, maybe Skio already knows them. Matt?
No, that's great. That's a great addition. That was on our list, the State Development Agency. The other thing that has come up for specifically through, not necessarily through our research, but through Superfund redevelopment program. I guess there is a partnership with the Council of Real Estate Consulting Corps, which basically provides free real estate consulting as basically a core of advisors, mostly kind of commercial, industrial, mixed use properties. And they're looking for examples of sites that Superfund redevelopment program is supporting that might benefit from their kind of consultation. And I thought that this might be a site that you all might be in a really good position to request a consultation. It just seems like it's another free pass at a group of real estate advisors that have said they're interested in consulting on Superfund. So I think that might be a good group to bring to the table. And if you're up for it, I'll put the name in the hat.
Actually,
Okay.
there's also a Council of Development Finance agencies that.
Oh,
have
yeah,
as well for Brownfield tour.
they do the same thing, right? Yeah,
And they're more finance oriented than development oriented.
that's CDFA.
CDFA,
Yeah, right. Okay.
Well, thank you. I think we're going to come back to this discussion, but the second half of your discussion, Rich, I want to put up the letter. Do you want to, I'll put it up first and you can talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, go ahead and put it up, Paul. I mean, it is what it is. The dark type is our idea. Essentially, we looked at all the municipal involved uses that came up in the previous report. And so the idea would be to go to each town agency and ask them the questions that are particular to their agency based on the earlier discussions. So, you know, the one that's new is the question that it was raised about a regional emergency communication center. I think everything else was actually discussed or reviewed in the previous report. But obviously, we now need to get down to more details. You know, is CPE, Concord Light and Power, you know, interested in the solar use? Would it have to be on the old footprint, which is the flat land, or could it be elsewhere? Those are the kinds of things we want to get down to with each agency. If we've left an agency off or left a key question off, obviously we should add that. And the choreography is, I think, Carrie and I discussed it, would be to create a package of letters after we get the committees, the task force input, give them to Carrie and as the town manager and say, we'd like to have these discussions. Could you please, you know, arrange to distribute? Maybe Megan can comment on that. And then we would call and make appointments to have these discussions.
Great. Let's discuss the letters in general, not wordsmithing them, but the idea. And then let's talk about the process of how we kind of get these in the hands of the various departments. So and any comments on the whole concept of reaching out formally in writing to the various departments, tailoring the letters to each department? Any good idea, bad idea, no brainer?
Very
Ross?
good idea, no brainer.
Good. That's my view as well. I think this is very much tied to the previous discussion about let's get the input, the municipal inputs from the town. This is not.
In writing, they'll, believe me, having been on a couple of boards, I think you'll get a much more serious response too.
I mean, I guess the question I have is, do we want to do a round of questions specific to their use needs or interest in the real estate and separate that from questions we may have about, infrastructure investment services impacts of developing the site? or whether we want to, package both in one request.
This feels a little bit, a starting point, more, a little bit aspirational based specific needs. I think, for example, Public Works is coming around a little bit to thinking about the site for their needs, and recreation certainly is, and housing certainly is. So getting some meat on that from these departments, I think. And then the next step is sort of, I guess, on the infrastructure part, but Court.
Yeah, I'd propose that we lower the bar a little bit here. We're asking for data or plans, but in fact, I don't think anybody's there yet. So to your point, I think we want to know who's having active conversations about potentials. Lest we have people avoid this because they're not at the data or plan stage yet.
It was certainly, thanks, Court. We certainly expect that many agencies haven't, got a plan. We did think that, the recreation plan will have some demand information, but,
Okay.
mostly we were trying to get, if you will, both, but I think I can, finesse the data or plans, recognizing that many of the agencies we want to talk to have no plan that's specific to this. But again, with say Concord Light, Power and Light, are you looking to expand your own solar within the town? Is that in your plan? And then is this site suitable for, or what subsets of this site might be suitable for that?
Yeah, I think we're certainly in agreement here. I could imagine the light plant moving with a greater sense of autonomy and articulated needs already out there, whereas a council on aging might say, Megan, can we put together a plan?
Yeah.
Can we make a pitch?
Okay, well, it seems to me the action item is I'll finesse that wording. I mean, clearly, if there is a plan, as there soon will be, I gather, on recreation, we should look at that, but we'll finesse that wording.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think if you just added the phrase unmet needs, I don't have any objection to have data or plans if they're on there, but I think you can sort of lower the bar by unmet needs or something like that, or.
Absolutely.
Paul,
Okay.
just a quick aside, apparently the select board are now moving away from the regional dispatch, so that idea may be moot at this point.
Do I take it at this point, and maybe Megan should speak on this? We'll take that off the list of the letters that we prepare at this point for Carrie. I mean, we could always bring it back before the end if it revives.
Okay, Pam, comment?
I want to just reiterate, maybe expand on Court's point. I think walking the tightrope of, if there are existing plans, yes, but also inviting innovative thinking, things that are not, that would be nice, and just walking that tightrope so that we're inviting, discussion of things that may be aspirational and may not yet be thought about. Because I think if you say, I mean, we're there with this plan revision, but it would be easy to say we haven't got any plans yet, so end of discussion, or we have a strategic plan with the following. But anyway, I think just keeping it as broad as possible to invite innovative thinking. And just a point on the regional business, I think we should, maybe there isn't, maybe a regional specific regional use has not been determined or is off the table now, but I think keeping regional uses out there as a possibility, although I know there may be differences of opinion on that, is very important. I think that we need to regionalize where it makes sense.
Okay, I mean, I think we can finesse that as well. And I totally, we think there's some specific questions that need to be asked, like, what is the upside downside to moving DPW, stuff like that, stuff that's already on the table. But I agree there are things that sort of may be percolating, have come up since the earlier plan. Let me try and adjust that language to encourage creative thinking, but I would like to, in general, unless there's a problem, keep the specific questions where they are, because it seems to me those come out of what we already, know about possible uses and how we might, ultimately rank them.
Hmm.
Harry, yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna sort of follow on that point. That I don't think we're obligated to put together a package of, these are the 5 things we're going to do in this square and this square and this square on the site. But more important to know what the potential uses would be over time. And we may not know or be able to afford to do it all at once. But I think it's the potential uses for the site that are, in my mind, more critical than knowing, okay, and 3 months after we acquire the site, we're going to hire a contractor to build whatever or move the lighting panels, that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I want to comment on that. So the previous committee dealt with potentials, a lot of potential.
Yes, I know.
I'd like this task force to move a bit beyond that, and not to the point where we have a shovel-ready plan or detailed plan or architectural plan, but something that's between that and potential. So we could.
Well, how about the word vision? That what people were talking about the needs, the unmet needs, what they would like to be able to do that they can't for various town committees. Which of those could reasonably be assisted through that site?
Exactly. So I just, I'm mindful of the time here. Pam, help keep your hand raised for a minute. I want to ask Megan 2 things. One thing, you have alerted me and us to sort of a multi-town planning in that area. Is there any need for the task force to go outside of the town to figure out, intertown needs? I'm just throwing that out there. Because you told me there's a lot of planning going on in that part of the world. Any comments on that?
Yes, I think that's a great idea. I mean, this is a kind of unique corridor. As pretty quickly you go through Maynard, Acton, and Concord. And what Paul's referring to is a planning effort between Maynard and Acton on the Powder Mill corridor, which it's Powder Mill right before it gets to Main Street. And there's visioning work being done to incorporate the river and to kind of create an overlay zoning that meets the needs of consistency and adding density to that area. There's also, that's also likely, I think, where Maynard's planning on doing their MBTA community density, just over the line there. So I think that there is some, it might be worthwhile to connect with the team that's working on that. And it might just be a one-stop shop, right? The folks that are working in Acton and Maynard, like a couple of staff people that might be interested in sharing a little bit more. And I can also share the website that outlines the market analysis and a lot of the work. They got a grant through MAPC to start this a few years ago. So there's a decent amount of resources there that might be helpful. I also want to mention that when I looked at the letters, one thing that's, sorry, dumpsters across the street. One thing that struck out to me is the public works, the comment on public works. And I am not sure the conversations that have been had in the past, but I think there is interest from our current public works staff to think about visioning for maybe this space and like what their needs are. The Keyes Road campus is really at capacity. And so I think there might, maybe to tweak that line in the public works letter, because I don't know if that assumption is still the case. I think that there is a lot of people thinking that maybe there could be some.
Okay, I mean, in other words, and that sounds easy to do. You're saying we shouldn't start with the assumption that they're resistant. I mean, what I had heard was that they didn't want to be on the edge of town, but
Yeah, I wouldn't assume that for anybody, I think going in and assuming that maybe people would be interested is probably a good idea. And the third thing I wanted to mention is when I did first start, I was presented with a large binder that I haven't opened yet that I think is a facilities assessment. And so I'm going to go track that down, but I think that there is some work that would be helpful to this group about town facilities. And that might be something that one of the folks that you speak with might mention. So I'm going to look into that and get back to you. And,
yeah,
oh, sorry.
Megan, could you also let us know who we should talk to there? Is it you? Is it somebody who works for you and Carrie?
Yeah, good point. I will do that. And finally, when you have this ready to go, and the list of people you're planning on sending it to, when I provide that for facilities, at least, I think you could start with me. But it probably would go to Public Works, actually. If you could let me know, because I'll send a note out to all the people that you're going to send this to let them know that, I'm working with you all and that this is, the task force is looking to collect more information. And so just so they know what's coming. And I usually like to have a date when asking for information, and it doesn't have to be hard and fast, but I think it probably helps people organize their workflow. So to think about, if you want to have a conversation within, a certain amount of weeks or get data back in a certain amount of weeks, I think that would be helpful. Understanding that all these folks have a significant workload. We are understaffed in a lot of these divisions with some key positions we're recruiting for right now. But I think this team is very responsive and wants to be helpful and wants to contribute to the work that you're all doing, but they might need a little patience as they're kind of figuring out how to organize their time to be helpful to you all.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I think we can do that and I think it's two things. One, any generally available planning data they can provide us, and then a time to sit down and talk with us. But, obviously, given everything else and the fact that we're looking at a public meeting at the end of the fall, I think the response time would be September, October.
So let me just summarize here. So as far as the process here, I'm not going to ask for a vote at this meeting, but I'd like Rich and Gary to actually draft a series of letters, and we could review those and vote on those at the next meeting. And then the process would be for Megan to reach out and alert the various recipients that they're going to get this request. There was some question about whether these letters should come from Carrie or whether we need formal approval from Carrie. I think that the way Megan outlined the process here, I think is the way to go. So basically we wait for Megan to the alert, we wait for the task force to vote for approval of these letters, and they're kind of set to go early September, I think. Yeah. That sound right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think Carrie needs to, I'm comfortable approving this contact with town staff, so that's no problem.
Okay. Quick comments, Pam, and then Court. I do want to get to our meeting discussion.
Just very quick, but I think just thematically for this letter, and I'm picking up on Carrie's excellent potential uses point and Carl's earlier comments about gaps and not relying on traditional analyses. I think we should be leaning into inviting creative thinking and potential uses. We are moving into the future, and narrowly is not a really good idea. Just what I'll that.
Okay. Thank you, Court. You're muted, Court.
Sorry, there we go. If appropriate, Megan, can you come back to us at a future date and talk to us about the interface with economic vitality? So that we've got that base covered if it's deemed appropriate. we do have somebody charged with that responsibility who might be also thinking about prospects here, might have something for us. I don't know.
Yeah, you know, I think one person you might want to add to the letter is our economic vitality manager, Mimi Graney. And she works closely with the Economic Vitality Committee. You might want to also reach out to the committee and the chair, but as a staff resource, she can kind of plug you in on the work that they're doing. And that, I think that would probably be helpful. That could be, I mean, we can invite her to a future meeting, or the subcommittee could work with her separately, however you want to proceed. She can be available.
Um,
Go ahead, Rich.
Paul, I know you want to move on, but I'll redo the letters and add the additional ones that we've talked about today. I'll get that back by Monday. And how do you want to wait for the next meeting to approve those, or how do you want to?
I'd like to put them in the meeting packet so we can kind of look at those and have a formal motion to send those out.
I won't be at that meeting, but hopefully Gary will.
Okay, and Megan, to your earlier point on, I'll call it multi-town planning on the corridor. Let's discuss that at our next meeting, how and if to engage on that, because I think we've been missing an opportunity. On the other hand, it's outside of our charge. So let's chat about the wisdom and the methodology if we want to proceed on that at the next meeting. Great discussion, guys. Thank you. I just I want to talk about the public meeting, and you saw this little PowerPoint. Of course, I always do PowerPoints in my. So EPA is having a meeting on the 11th of October, and I think it's their meeting. But I'm suggesting, and I cleared this with Kara, that at that meeting, so it's a meeting on the cleanup progress, but the public is going to have questions that go beyond that, and EPA is not in a position to answer those, and we're not ready to answer those. But so I did want the EPA to have at the end of their meeting just to tell the attendees that their town committee is working on this. Obviously, the ongoing 2229 Main Street Oversight Committee, and then our task force. And I will draft a slide that that we'll review at our next meeting, that we'll plant in Kara's slideshow. That's a suggestion. And I also want to, if we want to proceed, I want EPA to help us a little bit to note that we're going to have this task force will hold the first of a series of public meetings starting in November, if we want to do that. So we kind of we're prompted to that discussion at our last meeting because, gee, now that EPA is having the meeting, we ought to go public. And so how to do that beforehand, you know, whether we want to do a flyer, blah, we should talk about that. But the idea is that we would hold our first public meeting in November, and EPA would kind of tip off the attendees that that's going to happen. We would attend that public meeting. We, the task force, as many of us could attend, but we would not speak. Because basically that's our first listening session. We're going to monitor what's being discussed there, questions and concerns that are outside the scope of EPA's meeting that we can defer to November discussion. So that would be our first preliminary listening discussion, but then the idea would be to have a November public meeting, which would be hopefully well advertised. We'll figure out how to do that. But the main purpose of that first meeting would be really to provide information, what this task force is about, what we are doing, what our charge is from the select board. We wouldn't have any findings or conclusions, but it would be sort of exchange. Here's the task force. Here's what we're up to. Here's our schedule. Here, you know, here's what the select board has asked us to do. And that would be a first formal listening session. We would listen. There'd be questions, concerns, suggestions on a whole range of items. It could range from cost of ownership of the site to insurance coverage to reuse to liability and risk. But we want to listen there. That's that first session, and we would all attend that, and we probably would be in a position to answer some questions. But it's a very preliminary listening session, so it's an overview of the background, discussion of our work streams, and a Q&A. And then the suggestion would be we'd have a series of follow-on meetings, perhaps this is too ambitious, but we'd have a series of, I'll call topic-specific meetings, and this isn't necessarily the order. One would be discussing reuses to get input, one would be discussing risk and safety, one would be, or 4 work streams, and that would take us through the spring. And each meeting, it would be more focused information, giving out information and listening session. So that's, let's defer the outreach, but just, can I have some suggestion, some comments on whether we should begin in November with a public meeting and this whole concept of listening and information exchange? Kurt?
I was just hoping to get a little more background on the EPA meeting, what the agenda is, the format, who we expect would be there for the October EPA meeting, just to kind of set the stage for how that would interplay with our public meetings.
Okay, I'll ask Kara to do that in a moment, but the idea of having a public meeting in November, generally a listening session, and follow up with a series. It could be monthly, it could be, we could package it differently, but we would sort of go public in what we were doing and to advance our listening. This would not replace what David talked about last week, that there would be other venues for kind of getting concerns. So we have to kind of dig into that, but is this a good idea, bad idea? No.
I'm in favor.
I think just don't want to get ahead of ourselves, and because we don't know a lot right now. The task force job is to figure some of this out. So, be careful about how much we try to bite off. I think the November meeting will be very instructive in terms of even how much community interest there is in this. And we don't want to overdo things.
I agree completely, and David Ropey had the same comment. We don't want to get too far in front of ourselves, and that's why the plan for November would be very modest. It would be, here's who we are, here's our charge, here's how we're doing our work. It's in progress, and then depending on who was there, we'd listen, and that would be the basis for planning our future meetings. What we heard there, if nobody shows up, I'm not sure we would want another meeting, but so we should talk about how to sort of advertise that. But Carl and then Kurt.
Yeah, I think it's too early to commit to this series of meetings around specific topics, and we don't know where we're going to be in our thinking, and I do wonder about presenting this in that fragmented fashion. If we've gone further in our understanding of the interrelationship of some of these things, it might be more helpful to have meetings that integrate some of this information and present it in a more unified way than replicating the sort of way we're approaching the work and how we present it to the community. I'm just not sure yet. It just seems too early to kind of decide on that way.
I don't disagree with that at all. I think we should do the November meeting and then decide what we're going to do next. I don't think we should commit to that. It was just a suggestion that we, that's probably not going to be our only meeting. So let's focus on the November meeting on the heels of the EPA meeting. Court.
Yeah, very quickly, just to pick up on that same comment. If we were to have single issue or single topic meetings, it might imply things that would be quite inaccurate. If we just led with reuse, there might be an implication we're reusing. So everything has to be done in the larger context of all of these threads. And we have to walk this fine line. We're not saying, hey, we've got a blank slate, fill it up for us. But we're not narrowing the conversation with too many restrictions or dictates that we're going to bring to the town either. But I think we're going right down the middle, saying here's where we have options. We want to hear from you. Here's where we don't. People aren't going to come and fill a blank slate with any advantage to us. We've got to frame everything, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Let's defer any follow-on meetings. And use this first meeting as, let's hear what's on people's minds, and then we'll discuss what to do next. Kurt.
Well, I like the idea of an initial meeting as more of a listening tour, if you will. We're just soliciting input and feedback and just really being receptive to all points of view. I think in terms of follow-up meetings, we'll need to be real careful in considering format, because if it's a presentation style meeting, sometimes a single voice can be amplified beyond how it reflects the community's view. One format that I've participated in that I've really liked is setting up parallel workstations, if you will, and have a couple people associated with each one and some visuals so people can kind of wander the room and talk to people more casually. It gives a chance, as long as we're all aligned in terms of talking points and what areas, it just gives a more conversational aspect to it than having a presentation and getting into the back and forth that's associated with it. So again, I don't think we're there yet, but I wanted to throw out that as an alternate format that I've had success with in the past.
I think that's a great idea. It's a little bit like when the reuse committee had workshops on reuse, we did set up those separate stations on that. Let's defer sort of detailed conversation about any kind of follow-on meetings, if any. I just want to get closure on the November informational meeting, the kickoff here, because I want to work with Chris and Megan on planning, and I want to get a date for that. And we're not going to do the date here. We're going to go offline with figuring that out. But let's move along those tracks. Any follow-on meetings, let's defer any and all of the follow-on. Kara, the question that was out there about the EPA meeting. What the plan.
So the EPA meeting on October 11th will be a very general kind of overview of what's going on at the site. So the intended audience is people who have not been involved in the NMIA site to date, right? So somebody who's kind of driven by it, seen something, but they don't know what's there, to kind of bring them up to speed on what's been done in the past, what was here, what's been done in the past, what are we doing right now, and then how is EPA's remediation going to progress? This will be fairly kind of higher level overview information, not into the nitty gritties of uranium chemistry in the soil, but more that, these are the different approaches we're taking to different media, and this is how we're cleaning it up. And give people just a kind of way to see into this process if they've not been involved with it so far, and then provide them with resources and information on different groups that are doing more, such as you guys.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, two last things. One is approval of the previous minutes, which you have. This is a thank you, Rich. It's the July 25th meeting. Has everybody been able to take a look at these minutes? Are we okay with a vote to approve or edit this meeting and people one more time?
I would move approval, partly because I have a hard stop at 9:30, which is right now.
Do I have a second?
Second on the motion to approve.
Okay, well, all in favor of approval of the July 25th meeting, show by raising your hands. All opposed? Abstentions?
I wasn't at the meeting, so I'm not voting.
Okay, thank you. Fine, and thanks, Rich. At our next meeting, Rich is not going to attend. We'll need somebody else to take the minutes. Last, I know we have a hard stop for some of you. Any suggestions for topics at our next meeting? I think we're going to review these letters that Rich is going to prepare. There was one of the outstanding, interesting topics is institutional controls. I'd like to kind of chat about those because those have come up in general. Any other topics that for the next meeting, which would be in 2 weeks at 7:30.
Can I make a suggestion? It is August and there are probably going to be a lot of people who might not attend, including me. I don't know why maybe we should just meet again in September. Maybe you should take a poll of who's going to be around.
Yeah, I'd like you to do that too. I'm at school committee that night. I'm afraid that's got to take precedence for me.
Okay. All right, we thought we had agreed on, but let's revisit that. Should we not have? I want to get Rich's letters out, and should we skip the August 25th meeting and go right to September 12th? I think it is. That's
Again, I don't know, the letters are not gonna languish. I mean, September, the realistic time people take a look at them anyway.
Okay, I mean, we're getting decent attendance. This is August, so look, I don't want to push it. We just get a lot of dynamic things, that new things come up at these meetings. Should we, anybody passionately want to have a meeting on August 25th, or should we skip to the 12th of September?
Is it August 22, Paul?
Sorry. It's August 22, you're right. And then I think it's September. I think we had the week of Labor Day. I think we decided we were going to do it on the 12th and the 26th of September.
May
Are
may I
we,
toss out an idea, Paul?
Yes,
Get the letter out on August 22, but don't get into ICs because Pam and I will both not be there, and I think that'd be tough on the two of us to not be in that conversation on institutional controls.
okay. Okay, so you're saying is let's have a short meeting focused on getting those letters out and kind of limit it to that.
Just an idea.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, that sounds good. I've got to sign off now for another meeting, but.
Okay, so I did, okay, that's what we'll do. 22nd, short meeting. Terry Ackerman, final word on today. Do you have any final comments on, as our select board rep?
No, thank you. Have a good summer.
Okay, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you. I don't mean to kind of cram people's summer. Just want to keep rolling along. Okay.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank-
Paul. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thanks.